Hey, what's up, y'all? I am so excited about this person coming to the show because I have not only loved them from afar for years, I recently this year got to meet them in person. And we just had a whole little fun, queer ass, black ass, wonderful trans ass time. And yes, I've been trying to get them on the show, and we finally had some scheduling open up for us both. And yes, I'm so excited that they're here. So I want to welcome Tre'vell Anderson to the show.
Hello, hello. Thanks for having me.
I am so excited to have you here because you are such a bright light in our community right now, and it just makes me anytime I see you doing something. I think the first time we worked together was University of San Diego or Berkeley. Was it
Oh,
Berkeley? That was a while ago.
oh
I
my
think it was
God. I
Berkeley.
completely forgot about that.
Yeah, I think it was
I
Berkeley.
completely forgot about that. Yeah. Oh,
And
wow. Oh, you got a good memory.
I do. I do. So that was the first time I saw you. And then I think I ran across your podcast because, I feel like I'm the godmother of Black Trans
Hmm.
Podcast.
And you are. And you
and,
are.
so,
Okay.
and so I was like, oh, let me see who else is doing the work. And so I went and listened. Y'all were so dope. I love when I hear people and I can hear that they are proud of their blackness, because a lot of
Mm.
times when we in these kind of audio only, people get to putting on their
Yes.
NPR voices.
Yes, 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 yes.
losing the slang. And I was like, oh, these are my people. I'm like, you can
Yes.
hear it from the audio, these are my people. And I was like, oh, I'm so excited, let me look you up. And then I started following you on Instagram, and it just was I was like, oh, this is my type of person. So I want to tell the people a little bit about you
Hmm.
so that they can know your history. So we're going to start with that. So Tre'vell, they them pronouns, is
Hmm.
an award-winning journalist, noted podcast host, author,
Hmm.
doing world-changing work across society and culture. This year they were named in Out 100 magazine's 2023 100 most impactful LGBT people. And in 2020, they were on the list with me by The Root as
Hmm.
100 most influential African Americans. And so, really out here doing culturally relevant work that is centering marginalized people that are in those kind of gray spaces,
Hmm.
and, where we like to focus at the intersections of life. And I'm just so proud of you. And that's who you are.
Yeah.
So, you grew up in South Carolina, Charleston specifically.
Mhm,
T-
mhm, mhm.
Tell me who was loving up on you and when you were growing up. Who is your family unit? Tell me about your whole growing up situation.
Absolutely. Love this question. So I am the child of a single parent. My mother, Melanie Carter, she was in the Army for 23 years of my life. And so Charleston, South Carolina is home. That's where all the extended family is. That's where I spent all my summers. But, as a military brat, we moved all over the place, primarily the South. In addition to my mother, I always shout out my grandmother who helped raise us as well, Apostle Dorothy Montgomery Holmes.
Come on,
Um,
grandmother.
and my grandmother was sort of kind of like a local church celebrity in Charleston, like she was just very connected. She was known for so in the church that she came into her calling and came to Christ in, they wouldn't let her minister, they wouldn't let her preach.
Oh,
And
one
so
of
she
those
left that
churches.
church. Yes, it was one of those. So she left that church. She started her own church in her living room. Her first parishioners were her 8 kids, including my mother, who's the youngest. And so by the time I'm born, she has her own church. Because she helped raise us, I was attached to her hip. They used to call me her shadow. We all used to think I would be a preacher, and follow in her footsteps, because I was always around her that much.
Well,
And
I
so
still can see it, but go ahead.
we got a little something, something going on, a little ministering every now and again, speaking to the people. But the pulpit looks very different than God's Tabernacle of Prayer, which was my grandmother's church name. So I always highlight my mom and my grandmother. Those were the two kind of most central characters to and people to my upbringing. But then I also always say, because I moved around a lot, I became very skilled at like just building relationships, talking to people. I think it's that type of background that like led me to being a journalist and being, interested in talking to people. But I love Charleston. I'm a descendant, at least I've been told that, I'm a descendant of the Gullah Geechee folks in Charleston. One of the personal projects I want to work on for next year is like diving more into that family history and that part of the culture. Especially because a lot of my favorite foods are, connected to that culture and community. And so, yeah, that was my upbringing. Just a whole lot of church, and a whole lot of navigating my mother being in the military.
I want to know, I know when I was younger, nowhere near now, but when I was younger, there was a pressure because I was queer, assigned male at birth,
Mm-hmm.
to not be proud of the women in my family being the center of my core family unit, where almost because they were saying shit like no father in the home, no masculine representation, that's the reason why you're like this. And I grew up in the church too, and you need a man in the home. And there was always a pressure for me, if I was asked that question that I just asked you, for me to tell about my parents, but also include, but I had uncles, I had that I always had to include some type of male figure to validate something. As a kid, I don't know what I was validating something, but there was almost a shame in accepting that these was my core principal people in my loving family. Did you ever feel that pressure? Or because I see it sounds like you're proud that this is your core family. Did you ever feel the pressure not to be proud of that?
Absolutely. I mean, I remember being younger, right? And other folks in the family making a comment, right, about my mom being single, about me only hanging out with my grandmother, right? Like that was part we'll get to the book, one of the books later, but I mentioned in one of the books how, I have an uncle who, when I would be spending those summers in Charleston, for lack of a better word, they would force me to stay at it's my mom's sister's house with her husband. But part of the reason for that was so that I had this male figure, my uncle, being able to, instill whatever manness stuff in me.
Discipline,
all of
that shit.
Just an example of how to be a man, right? Because this idea that, with women can't teach you how to be a man, blah, 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 right? But that relationship in particular was and is the site of so much of my childhood trauma, and the gender policing that came with it. I mentioned in my book how this uncle in particular, I was always a kid and a person who, like, I speak with my body. I use my body to speak, right? And so I would always have a limp wrist when I'm talking. And my uncle had always warned me that, like, you need to stop doing that. That's that faggot shit. Da, 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 da. And one summer, I guess he got tired of warning me, and he like punched me in my chest, stole the wind out of me, right? As a means of trying to, toughen me up and all of that. And so, there were men and masculine present in my life, including my older brother. But it really was the women who were running shit. You know what I mean? And so, like, my dad, I should say, my dad is back in the picture now after 20 some odd years. Him and my mom are back together. They got remarried. They live together. Yes, child.
Work.
Yes, child. After the divorce 30 some odd years ago, 20 some odd years later, they're back together, living
Come
in
on,
bliss.
ultimate spin the block.
Literally, okay, literally. But he wasn't present, right? He was in and out of jail. He was doing what he was doing with the street life and all of that other stuff. And so I would love to be able to, bring some of the masculine energy into the mix, but it just wasn't present in a generative way, and in a positive way. But I definitely felt that pressure. And sometimes even still today, I think we can feel that pressure with the ways that our identities, right, are being exploited, politically, and everybody always wants to blame it on you didn't grow up with your daddy and all of that. I feel like many of us feel the need to say, oh, my dad was in my life, or I had this uncle who was super present, so that that just because I was raised by women is not the reason why I am queer or trans or whatever. But in my case, we didn't. Yeah, there just weren't any positive male role models around. Like even in the I have a family in which the men are these are old school Black men, right? Grew up in the 70s, right? Like this is also the South Carolina. I always remind people that Charleston was the capital of the Confederacy at one particular point. So like that racial history is baked in their understanding of what a man, and a Black man specifically, is supposed to be. You know what I mean? And so they dealing with a whole lot of other stuff.
Right.
to say the least. But it did not manifest as a positive or useful or generative example for me, nonetheless.
Switching into the vein of the history of Charleston, not that part, but queer history. How have you connected with the queer history of Charleston? Because I know some things about Charleston but when we think about like Rainbow Row, when we think about the Battery and its history of cruising the men. Cruising, I know a little bit of history in that part, and some other things, some trans history too. What is your connection that I want to kiki about? But what is your queer connection with Charleston's history? And can you explain your connection with that?
Yeah, so I didn't even discover Charleston had a queer history until I was in college, until I had completely dissociated, for the most part, from Charleston as a home of sorts. So yeah, I didn't discover these bits and pieces of history of like how queer people were fighting back and claiming space, particularly in Charleston, and Black queer people more, especially so. Until I went to college and became interested in just a little bit more of my own personal history as I was discovering, who I am and the language that like works best for me. And that's why I mentioned earlier, like one of the like personal projects I want to do is go back to Charleston, go back to the Gullah Geechee community there, and tease out a little bit more of both kind of my own particular family's place and connection to the queerness and the queer history of Charleston, but also that broader story. I remember when I was in college, I was an RA. I went to Morehouse, for the record.
Me too. Not Morehouse, but I was an RA.
Yeah. And one of my residents, my junior year, was from Charleston. And she now was the person who had told me, I don't know if you experienced this when you were in school, but like the young queer people who came into Morehouse in that year to 3 years after me were so radical. They were already out the closet. They were out the closet since they were in middle school. Like their identities had just manifested a lot more quickly. And so this student was able to like introduce me to this history of our shared hometown that I just did not know about. Right. And so that kind of jump started my connection to it. It was this student. I'm trying to remember her name right now. Oh my God. Oh, I hate this for me. I'm gonna look it up and I'll say it later. But
Okay.
she's now doing really great work for trans community, especially in the North Carolina area. But she was the person who really was like, "Oh, you don't know that we've been turning it out here in Charleston,
The young people bringing you
for a
along.
minute." Literally, and so much of my life, now that I think about it, has been like I am as unfolded in and secure in myself, largely because of those younger folks at Morehouse who, just were secure in themselves. I'm thinking of Kenneth Pass or Marcus Lee, who are great academics right now at their respective institutions. I'm thinking of Fatima Jamal, who's a fabulous, artist, multidisciplinary, all of the things, model. We all met at Morehouse back in the early, 2010s. And they were the ones who really showed me, right, in that historically Black all male space that is Morehouse, right, that there were other options and other possibilities of how we could exist and move through the world.
I love that. That's so beautiful because I think that kind of generational disconnect, if we understand that we are learning from each other, we
Absolutely.
see the power in the generations, whether you're young, old, da 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 da. We laid the pathway so people can be free. And yes, I can look back and see these young people enjoying that pathway,
Yes.
and it can free me even more from the shackles
Absolutely.
of conditioning or whatever. So I think that's beautiful. Let me tell you, do you know who Don Simmons is?
No?
Okay. Don Langsley Simmons. Does it sound familiar at all?
No, but tell me, hit
Let's
me.
kiki. Let's kiki. So in Charleston, this was some interesting trans history. Now, it's not Black trans, but it connects with Black people in a little bit. And so this is a white trans woman, and her name is Don Langsley Simmons, and she is an English trans woman that moved to Charleston. I mean, moved to Canada, and then as pre-transition and started this whole amazing career with writing, prolific writing, biographies of like women, powerful women like Princess Margaret and some of the first ladies of the United States, Mary Lincoln Todd, Jacqueline Kennedy, Lady Bird, just a bunch of first ladies. And so she created this life, and then she met this girl, this cisgender girl, this painter by the name of Isabella Whitney. And so she befriended her. They became cool, they kiki buddies. At the time, it was a he, and they were, this is her her little butch queen friend, and so they are. She kind of got a coin. She got a coin. They kind of just living this kind of socialite, queer ass life, queer and cisgender woman friendship life. And so she was like, "Girl, why don't we move down to Charleston, South Carolina?" And she was like, "Girl, honey, I don't know that, we white and we might succeed down there, but we also, I'm a little queer. I might not fuck with them like that. They might not fuck with me like that. It might be a little shady." And Isabella was like, "Girl, let's go in on a house. I pay the most of it. Let's go in on a house down there." And they bought them a house in Charleston.
Wow.
So 2 weeks after buying the house and them moving down there, Isabella, the cisgender woman, passes away. And she leaves Don $2 million and the house.
Oh, wow.
At this time, Don is discovering her, it's time for me to be the woman that I've been trying to be, but da 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 da. So she becomes one of the first, not the first, but one of the first. Or I think she is the first. She's the first to get it here. The other women, we know Christine Jorgensen went to Denmark and came back with her coin, with her pocketbook.
Amen. Amen.
And so Don Langsley Simmons is the first one to get her pocketbook here. And if anybody is slow and not catching her sex change, her gender reassignment surgery. she's one of the first women to get a sex change here in the United States, living in Charleston. So while this is a part of Black history, during that time, she met this amazing in South Carolina, in Charleston. She met this amazing Black piece of trade, a mechanic.
See, I knew it.
And it caused this big uproar in the news and how it was going on, because this is 1968. What happened was, right before that, Virginia versus Loving just got passed, that you can marry whoever the fuck you want to marry. So her being one of the first white women to marry a Black man, and now they living in this amazing home. She's a millionaire. She's a socialite. She's doing all these amazing things after being an author. So it was just kind of this groundbreaking thing that was pretty dope history.
I love that.
Of Charleston, South Carolina.
I love that. Yeah, there is so much that I don't know. But just about the ways that queer people, trans people, more specifically, have just been like paving ways in society, prior to this moment. But this is the history that, so many of us don't know. It makes these people think that we just, I always say it feels like people think we just dropped onto the face of the earth with Laverne Cox and Orange is the New Black.
At the times when the Times said that this was a tipping point.
You know what I mean? Yeah. But even this story is wow, this is in the 60s and the 70s. And there's a trans woman married to a Black man, right? Because that's special for the time, right? Who... I love the fact that she just got this big old home with her friend. That's wild.
Yeah.
Now I'm I need to go visit, see if the house is still there.
Yeah, and she just passed away in 2000. This is a recent thing. So when we tell these stories, these aren't, she was born I think she was born in literally 1900 or 1902, somewhere early. Mm-hmm. And so when we think about these kind of stories, and we try to reiterate in telling the story that this is not something new. We have been doing this kind of work. And Absolutely. I know that's, if you're on this show, that's repetitious, but I'm just giving you another example of our queer history that, people don't talk about. And it is our job as queer folks to kind of share it and be stewards of educating people in that history.
Absolutely. We gotta keep it alive. I mean, that's one of the reasons I ended up doing my book, is I felt like, the first trans people that I remember just existing in culture, right, in a meaningful way for me was the reality TV dolls, I'm thinking of Jayla Sims, I'm thinking of Isis King, Leomi Maldonado, in the early aughts. But who could we have all been if we knew, right, that, all these other trans people existed before then? Right. And for me, when I was I was at Morehouse just doing research, and I stumbled on Monica Roberts and Transgrio. And that is how I learned of a lot of the existence of trans people, before, like I said, Laverne Cox, you know what I mean? Yeah. Lucy Hicks Anderson and Jim McHarris and, Ajita Wilson. And, we can go down a long list of people, but I think so much about what we're going through right now as a community is because because we don't know the history as a community, and the people who are in power also don't know the history of how we have always been here, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think us telling those stories, even the small stories like Dawn, right? Yeah. It helps, I hope, right? Just change people's ideas and thoughts about how we exist.
And the curators of that knowledge. So when we think about archives, when we think about people who are the curators of and decide what's important to go in here to create the capsule, they have to be looking from a broader lens that says this may be important later. They have to be people who are doing this curation has to be future thinking, so that, because that stuff happening with Don, somebody could have been like, oh, that's just some subculture weird shit that's just happening, and wouldn't know that in 2023, these teens, 2010s, this tipping point culturally would be happening. And so they wouldn't even know to archive it or look for that particular thing. When I go to archives, there's sometimes I will find things and I'm like, oh, nobody knows that this happening, because at the time that it happened in 1870, that this trans woman by the name of, prior to transition, her name was Dick Montgomery. But in the paper, it said when they learned about being free here in Texas, when they went during Juneteenth. Now that we talk about Juneteenth, the trans history in Juneteenth is that Dick Montgomery transitioned and started to live their life as Lizzie Montgomery. And so I'm a trans woman, so I'm telling that story and I know that it's important, but somebody else would see that newspaper clipping and not know that that's something we might need here in Texas with this climate of bullshit that we got going on in Texas. And so, so having that insight of future thinking, if you are creating a capsule, if you are writing a book, if you are doing a podcast, if you are creating a film, whatever you're doing, understand you got to have that forward thinking mindset to be able to, curate something that they can learn from.
And it's context, right? Like it's all context. And I think, especially for trans stories so much, I feel like when we go into the archives, a lot of us finding the existence of trans people in the archive is having to realize that, like, obviously the language back then is not the language we had today. And so you got to read a little differently to be able to sometimes say, oh, that's actually a trans person.
Facts.
And so that's the importance of, in particular, having us as trans people, right? Queer
trans
people, non-binary people, trans griots, right? Going into the archives, finding and discovering the ways that we have always been here, and perhaps the details that we can pick up on other archivists, right, weren't able to or didn't, right? And so the archive, I always say, ends up being incomplete because we don't have these more informed, well-rounded, nuanced, information about these folks. And at least with some of the work that I'm doing, I'm trying to build out that archive just a little bit better with more details, more context. I remember writing my book and my editor would say, oh, I don't think this bit of information is necessary here. It feels like a tangent to whatever's there. And I would say, yeah, it is a tangent, but it's context. Right? I want you to know that as Ajita Wilson was building her cult following, right, as an adult film star overseas, I want you to know what was happening in culture writ large, right?
Yeah.
As she was building her empire, I want you to know that this was happening in politics, or this album was number one on the Billboard charts at that time, or because I think for me, I think when I look back at a lot of these stories, we just don't get to hear a little bit of the humanity of these people. Right. And I think when you can tell us about, this person really liked painting their nails red, or this person really liked this color, you humanize them in a different way. And I think at least a lot of the work that I'm trying to do is actually, let me change that. Because we are already human. But the ways that people regard us is as if we are not human. And so when we're talking about the ways that we document, or exhume the documents that are already there of people who lived and loved and existed like us, it's important to make sure, right, that the audience is getting some of these tidbits that show that, like, we are real people. We aren't, Norman Bates and Psycho, for example.
And understand that we are every second of the day, every second of the present, we are creating history. And so we're not just talking about history long time ago. We're talking about history 2 seconds ago. So right now, as me and Tre'vell are having this conversation, two queer people, two people who are trying to break down binaries, who are trying to shed light on our particular lives. Right now, there's a genocide happening in Gaza. Right now, there is an attack in the legislation through legislation on the agency over women's bodies, the agency over trans bodies, the agency over, you know, the Black lives. These things are happening as we are speaking right now and creating history. So yes, don't think of it just about incidents that happened in the past. Think about it, incidents that happen in right now, because somebody, especially if we are recording and we are using this archive, somebody 50, 60, 70 years from now might run across it and not understand the context, or be just giving the context of the larger culture that the larger culture was giving. And so we're trying to give you a deeper way, more intersectional and more broader way of thinking about what we're saying. So let's talk about your book. Books.
Yes.
With an S. So, because it goes back to what I was saying about young people also can lay a path. I'm an upcoming author. I got a book on the way, and I am so, you know, I am so excited that there are people, young people, older people, but especially young people who have laid the path for me to come down this lane and do what I need to do. So you have 2 books. One of them is called We See Each Other, A Black Trans Journey Through TV and Film. And the other one is called Historical Black Phrases, from I ain't one of your little friends to who all gonna be there. And so tell me about your experience in becoming an author. Like, why did you want to do that? And, you know, what's that journey like?
So being an author was never a dream that I knew I could dream. You know what I mean? It just was not something that I had thought about. And when I was working, I started my career at the LA Times, covering diversity in Hollywood with focus on Black and queer film. And this was around the like Oscar So White time period. And I was writing all of these stories. And I had an agent who just liked my writing style. And she said, her name is Patrice Caldwell. She's my agent today. She reached out to me. She DM'd me on Twitter, if I'm not mistaken, and was like, hey, have you thought about writing a book? I like your writing style. I think it'd really translate. We had one phone conversation. I said, girl, I ain't got time to write no book. I don't know what that looks like. No, thank you. She was like, well, if you ever change your mind, I'm here. Fast forward a few years, and I just was like, you know, I had gotten laid off from Out Magazine. I left the LA Times, went to Out Magazine. I was their director of culture and entertainment. I worked under Raquel Willis when she was the executive editor there. And we were all there for a year, did some really great work that I'm super proud of. And then we all got laid off. And then we all got laid off 2 days before Christmas 2019. And it was at that moment that I said, okay, well, maybe I need to call her back and do this book project, you know? And at that time, I was really interested specifically in, you know, what had happened since Time magazine said that we were in a trans tipping point with Laverne Cox on Orange is the New Black. In fact, my last story as a staff member at Out Magazine was a cover story for January 2020 that featured, it was a double cover with Laverne Cox and Chellaman, who is a Asian, Jewish, deaf model and writer. And the entire piece was like this 7,000 word piece, which they would never give anybody to write today. But it was a 7,000 word piece charting that history of trans visibility. Basically what the book became started with that article. And after doing this 7,000 word piece, I was like, oh, that feels like a book. You know, like it's not a book because the book is 30 some odd thousand. But I was like, wow, I did all of this research, captured it here, spoke to my agent, and she was like, okay, let's put a proposal together. Now, the problem I had was there weren't many comps for the type of book that I wanted to write, which was this like part history of trans images, specifically with a focus on Blackness, and part like memoir. Because there were no comps, it became difficult in the selling process to say, hey, y'all, people will actually be interested in this book. You need to give me money to do it. You know what I mean? And so and then also they said that because of a film like Disclosure existed, which I had an opportunity to participate in, because Disclosure existed, they did not see kind of like IP potential for the idea because there was already a documentary. So like, what could this book become beyond the book? Those are the things that were brought up to us while we were trying to sell it and like navigate the publishing industry. And so I say all that to say, it was actually kind of difficult to just become an author. I didn't want to go independent because I felt that there was something important about having these Black trans narratives on a major publisher, and what I at least thought would lead to like potential promotion things. It didn't necessarily net out that way, but we could talk about that later. But those were my motivations for trying to go through the like traditional publishing system. We ended up getting 12 no's on the book. And the 13th response that we got was the only yes that I got. And that was from my publisher at Disney. Anscape Books is the name of the imprint, which is attached to the website Anscape, formerly known as The Undefeated. It was a journey though, just because behind the scenes, as you might imagine with a behemoth like Disney, there are just all of these different players and parts, and it was a new imprint, so they didn't have an editor. So I didn't have an editor for the first bulk of the time of me writing, and all of these other stuff. And in addition, in case y'all can't tell by my voice, I just do a lot. I'm an extra. I have a big old personality. I like to have 12 things going in the air at the same time. So in addition to the book, the first book, I had the podcast Fanti with Jared. I started doing Would a Day, which is a daily news podcast as well. Around the time that the book was due, I was a consulting producer on the final season of Legendary on HBO Max. Like, I was all over the place, Diamond. I had no right doing all of this shit all at once.
You did.
Well, listen. But it just made it made it a very difficult process beyond the writing of the book. The actual writing was, in the grand scheme of things, the easy part. It was navigating the relationships and the people and, going back and forth on what the cover would look like for the book with Disney, because I had very specific ideas. That is where the greatest struggle was. And after I sold my book, my podcast co-host Jared, he's had this idea for a book that he's been working on for 7 years at the time that we're recording this, which was this coffee table dictionary of these Black phrases that we heard growing up, that we put definitions to and examples. We've interviewed about a dozen different Black people, and we have these essays throughout the book contextualizing AAVE, our language, how so much about how we talk as Black people, it's like tonal. You can say the same thing 5 different ways and it means 5 different things. And so all of that is in the book, historically Black phrases, from I Ain't One of Your Little Friends to Who All Gonna Be There. And it just so happened, timing worked out to where both of the books came out in the same year. This year, my book came out in May, and Historically Black Phrases came out in September. But the thing I'm most proud about, specifically with We See Each Other, is I already know that other trans folks in culture, right, who are interested in writing books, have been able to use my book as a comp, right, as they're pitching, their stories elsewhere. Same thing with Raquel's book that just came out, right, The Risk It Takes to Bloom. Same thing with, I forget his name, Skylar is his last name. But he's a trans influencer that just came out with a book as well. So many, books are coming out, and hopefully, right, it leads to the place where we get more narratives from everyone. The memoir, if that's your thing, but also other types, right, of works that are written by trans people as well. So all of to say, becoming an author it's been a wild just journey, I'd say, over the last 2-ish years, that all of this has been going on. But I'm super grateful because ultimately it has allowed me to continue. I love when I'm able to go do a speaking engagement or go do an interview and tell people about Lucy Hicks Anderson and how she was a bad bitch. Back in the day,
Yeah.
to see people when you can, and we have photos, right? We have photos of Lucy Hicks Anderson. We have photos of Carlette Angie Lee Brown. We have photos. And so to have those in my presentation or have those in the book so folks can be like, oh, there's proof. You know what I mean? Like that's the greatest joy, despite all of the drama I had to deal with. That makes it a little bit worth it.
Let's talk about pressure and see if you have the same pressure that I'm feeling as a coming author. So I'm a Black feminist. I'm somebody who feels that almost on a religious basis, that Black feminism, Black feminist theory is a part of my life. It is my compass. It's my North Star. It is something that I look forward to. Look forward to in my moral capacity. I want it. That's the future. So anyway, there are mammoths of books in that canon. When we think about The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, when we think about Ain't I a Woman by Bell Hooks, when we think about innovative works, like more new age works, like and culturally relevant works like When Chickens Come Home to Roost, When Chickenhead Come Home to Roost by Joan Morgan. When we think about, new age authors like Undrowned, Alexis Pauline Gumbs. When we think about, queer authors like Sister Outsider, Audre Lorde. You get what I'm saying? These mammoths of almost people quote these books like the Bible, like scriptures. Like it's just something, how much pressure do you feel adding something to the cultural canon of trans literature? Because I have so much angst about it. I have so much angst. So that's why your courage and bravery to even do it or attempt it is so inspiring. But I have debilitating angst about it because I want it to be great. So how do you feel about the pressure?
I feel you. I remember when I finally finished We See Each Other and I sent the final draft off, I was just like, oh my God, did I get everything right? Did I say all the right names? Did I say it in the right way? Because, when we're talking about our shit, you got to say it the right way or somebody going to come drag you because you said it the wrong way, even though that wasn't your intention. I had all of these thoughts. And what I ultimately came to say for myself was that, this is my offering to the world, hopefully to the canon, that folks will regard it as like something that is important and foundational for the canon. But it is just mine. It is just from my vantage point. I actually, the final version of the book is not actually what I sold to my publisher. I sold to the publisher something that was a little bit more clinical, a little more clinical academic approach, if you will, to trans history. But the final
and you can do that because you're a Morehouse person, you are a Stanford person. You can do that. I'm sure. That's what it is.
Yeah, that's what I sold to them. That's what they were expecting. But in the course of writing, I was like, oh, this is boring. I was like, this is not making this really interesting history about how we have existed, particularly as Black trans people. It doesn't make it come alive to me as the person who's writing it. Then it definitely, isn't going to come alive for the people who are reading it. And so that's when the memoir aspect of the book came in. And so I'm not just talking about Laverne Cox and Orange is the New Black, though I talk about her a lot in the book. I'm also talking about just gender transgression in culture more broadly. So that gives me the opportunity as, a Black queer person from Charleston, South Carolina, to wax poetic about Tyler Perry as Medea. and connect that to what I believe to be our lived experiences as Black trans femmes in our community, because I noticed the ways in which the jokes that we all lodge at Medea, right? And we talk about Medea, her hands, her facial hair, her Adam's apple, the size of her body, etc., are the exact same jeers that we as Black trans women and femmes experience in our community. And considering that, I think we need to have a conversation about how people who perceive us as trans people, trans women and femmes in particular, to be men in wigs, they think we're Medea. And so they're treating us like Medea gets treated in culture. And so I wanted to take some of these cultural productions that we all know and love, laugh at, etc., and show kind of the weight of them in culture and the ways that they manifest in terms of like the horrible, ultimately, experiences that many of us are navigating on the daily. But I mentioned that to say that pressure that you talk about, because I leaned as much as I could into the specificity of my perspective, my vantage point, my experience, to me, it alleviated that pressure, because now I'm not trying to, make something that, Audre Lorde would love. I'm just trying to make something that, from the uniqueness of my experience, presents a different type of, vantage point on these same issues. Hell, and I'm referencing, I do my best in the book. I often say that my favorite part about We See Each Other is the index, because, for me, as somebody with that little bit of academic background, I want you to be able to go straight to the index and say, all I want to read about is Sir Lady Java. And so I can find where Sir Lady Java is, go straight to that point, and use it as a reference text in that particular way. But yeah, I think that is what allowed me to alleviate myself of the pressure. And then also just realizing, to be quite honest, that, I'm a bad bitch. I done did some things. I have carved out a voice, a space, and an experience, right, that we know based on whether it's the podcast audience, whether it's the social media following or whatever. There are people who not only are interested in what I have to say, but they need what we have to say, because we also have needed what we have to say. You know what I mean? And for me, that is how I've been able to kind of navigate those pressures. And the question also makes me think of, really quickly, as we record this conversation, I'm not sure when it's coming out, but as we record this conversation, Jared and I, for Historically Black Phrases, we're sort of kind of getting, lit up on social media over on Twitter right now, because some African Americans have discovered the cover of the book, and it has sent off internal signals for them that make them feel as if, we are giving away the secrets for the culture, or we are only doing this for white consumption, or whatever the case may be. And I bring that up because, I've been seeing all of the commentary and the feedback. And this type of feedback is something that was similar to what you talked about, the pressure of just kind of putting these like Black feminist type works out there and wanting it to be good and stand alongside those texts. With Historically Black Phrases, we were like, okay, we want to do a book. This is a book for Black people, right? This is a book for us to go down memory lane and have fun talking about, the difference between a corner and a swallow, or talk about, why everybody knows, when somebody said God is good, you're supposed to say all the time. And when they say all the time, you're supposed to say God is good back. Those things that connect us linguistically as Black people. We wanted to do something that allowed us to uplift that. And that was our focus, knowing that the community or some members in the community might feel how these people on Twitter feel. But my response to that, being in this moment right now, is I'm totally down and open to have conversations about folks' thoughts about the book, either of these books and what's brought up in them. But first and foremost, you got to read it. First and foremost, you got to wrestle with what I've actually presented, right? And then we can talk about whether or not you think it's good for the culture, bad for the culture, whether or not it does actually stand up against, All About Love by Bell Hooks, or, Sister Outsider. Then we can talk about those kind of comparisons. But what I want most is for folks to take my work, wrestle with my work, and then we can, extrapolate it, right? And you can tell me what I missed. You can tell me what you would have put in it, right? You can tell, and you can also critique. I want to be clear. You could also critique the fact that I did, for both of these books, go the traditional publishing route, right? And because of the nature of publishing, that means, yes, my editor, well, at least the editor for Historically Black Phrases, is a white person. Absolutely. But we can talk about how, the design type that we use in our book was created by a Black designer. We can talk about, other ways that we did our best to bring in a variety of Black perspectives, specifically for Historically Black Phrases. And then for We See Each Other, trans perspectives, right? So like I don't know if you know who Tuck Woodstock is, but they host the podcast Gender Reveal. Tuck, so I made Disney hire Tuck to do the sensitivity read of my book, right? To bring in a community member from that vantage point. We reached out to, trans artists and designers to try to do the cover. We didn't end up going with that person's design. But like, I was trying to be as intentional as possible to bring the community into both of these works as a means of also alleviating kind of that pressure that you mentioned of this needing to be right. Because I do want it to be right. You know what I mean? Yeah. And the way that we accomplish that, considering all of the, the white supremacy, the capitalism, the everything, right, is by bringing more people, as many people as we could, into the fold. Sorry for that long answer, but
no. I totally get you. And I think that's where the angst coming at. It's like there's a part of me that is like, fuck it. There's a part of me that's like, I'm doing this for me, so fuck whatever any other motherfucker. It's an archive. It's not my book is not just a memoir. It's just it's a memoir and kind of just giving context of, I guess that's a memoir.
Yeah.
I'm giving context of my life, but prior to adulthood, that is a unique part of my life that I think it's for parents. Actually, I want parents to read it so that they can create a safer place for their queer children if they have queer children. And so for me, part of me is like, this is my truth, and so a fuck it part. But also, I'm on my Erykah Badu shit where I created this motherfucker, and I'm sensitive about this. I'm sensitive about my shit.
Absolutely. And you know what? Yeah. We can be, and I think we can be sensitive. I am also very sensitive about both of these texts. And I think we can be sensitive, right? But we can't allow our sensitivity to block legitimate critique. Legitimate critique. Because, some people out there just talking their mouth. They don't care.
They don't like you because you trans, so it don't matter what you write.
You know what I mean? That part. Absolutely. Or they don't like, So many of the comments particularly about Historically Black Phrases right now, folks are like, who would write this book? And then they look us up and they would say, for my co-host, who is a lighter skinned, freckle faced, individual, they'll be like, they have said, oh, this nigga is exactly who I think would write the book. And I'm like, oh, wow. So you chose to show the picture of the lighter skinned person of the two of us, because for whatever reason, that confirms what you believe are like these like anti-Black intentions with this project. And then there are other people who are like, oh, Tre'vell, that name with that apostrophe. Oh, I know that's a nigga. And you're right. I am a nigga, right? I'm a very particular type of nigga. Absolutely. You know what I mean? I'm a very particular type of nigga who can also, write a book like this and it not be what folks think it is. And so I say all that to say, I think we can remain sensitive about our stuff, especially because, right, some of this is our life story. You know what I mean? Like that's our history, right? It's
Uh-huh.
our archive. I think we can be very sensitive, and I sure as hell am because of the much how much work I put into both of these things. I'm very fucking sensitive, and that's why I say you need to read the book before you try to come with me with anything. You know what I mean? So, some of the comments that luckily, I haven't heard or had, you know, any like negative responses from trans community about we see each other, and I'm so grateful for that because I thought the girls might drag me just a little bit because I say a couple things in that book, honey. But with historically black phrases in particular, it's one of those things where like we really did this book out of the love for how we talk. You mentioned earlier how you listen to our podcast and you were like,
Mhm.
oh, these aren't folks who are putting on their NPR voices and like they're just being authentic. That is why we did the book, because I want everyone to feel as comfortable, going on NPR talking like how we talk here on Marsha's Plate, and feeling
Mhm.
secure and comfortable. Why? Because if we are going to bring white people into the conversation, let's talk about how they're able to move through the world using our language, acting as if they're us, get applauded for it, get money for it, etc. Right? Whereas those of us who find ourselves in these same spaces, we feel like we got to sound like we on NPR to be able to navigate these corporate spaces. And so it's important for me anywhere I go, and you've seen me in a variety of different places, and this is a lot more so now at this point in my life. But like, this is the voice you gonna get whether I'm on NPR doing, pop culture happy hour, or, we're in, the God Talk documentary at the Smithsonian, or, like, this is what it is. And that is why we did that book. So yeah, we sensitive, but because I'm sensitive, that's why you gotta read the book. Cause I don't want to engage with your bullshit when you're just going off of vibe. You're going off of your own perception of the material as opposed to the actual material. That's how my sensitivity shows up. Because I'm open to critique, especially if I got something wrong or you feel like something is missing or whatever. Absolutely. I think we have to be open to critique, no matter where you are in this thing called life. But you need to make sure your critique is valid, because you're gonna piss me off if you say something that is contradictory to what's in the book that you would have discovered. For example, if you just read the introduction to historically black phrases, you would know all you needed to know about what this book is, why we did it, who our audience is, etc. You know what I mean? Anyway,
So basically, if you come for my shit, motherfucker, come correct.
come correct. Come correct. La, la, la,
You brought up Guys Talk. So recently, we were in a documentary together. We were the principals. So we were the principals of their very first, the Smithsonian, the African American Museum of History and Culture.
History and culture. Mm-hmm.
Yes, we were principals of their document, the very first documentary that they ever did, which was super, super, super amazing. So back in October, they premiered it to everybody, and that's where we met in person. Let me tell you something about the situation. I've been a part of stuff, not to be boastful, but I've been part of tons of stuff. You know what I'm saying? You too. Like, we've been a part of shit. So sometimes where we are as queer people, sometimes it could be super, super fancy and big and and sometimes it could be honey down home where we coming in, they got red cups and juice.
Yes.
It could be real grassroots. And so,
yes.
It's a range of shit. So when in this situation, I cannot tell you that I had grasped what this was about to be when I got into that space. So I thought, this is what I thought it was coming. I thought I was going to come to this space and I was going to sit in the audience and we watch it, and the creators is on stage talking about their shit and da 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 da. So that's what I thought. But when I come into this space, the theater is packed. The kids are dressed to the nine like we going to church. It is the bougie elite of DC.
Yes.
It is, we got a green room. We got coordinators putting us in different rooms, steering us through the maze of the back ends of theaters. I'm like, oh, this is for real. This is something else. That's why I dressed the way that I did. Because if I knew to dress up, motherfuckers was in gowns and shit. I'm like, honey, I'm a fashion bitch. I like to come and put on. So if I knew to come and put on, I would have put on. But I'm coming, I got fucking chucks and a jumpsuit. And I did not come prepared. I felt cute. You know, I'm always look cute. But I was not prepared for what this was about to be. Were you prepared?
Yes and no.
Okay.
So yes and no. Like I also, we weren't given clear information.
Okay.
Period. About, and it doesn't seem like anyone, actually I shouldn't say anyone. I think, I forget her name. But she's the agnostic one of the principals. But I think she might have had most information because it seems like she, asked follow-up questions and like all those other stuff.
Very agnostic. Very agnostic.
Very that. You know what I mean? Love to her. So I think she seemed like she was the most prepared, but for the majority of the rest of us, I think we all were like, oh, now I just assumed that there might be pictures or something. So that's why I put on my little, cocktail dress moment. Because they were like, it's the premiere. It's going to be screened at the Oprah Winfrey Theater. It's the Blacksonian. Yes. But I did not know we were doing a panel. I did not know that we discovered right at the event that the poster for the whatchamacallit is this like collage of
our faces.
Of our faces. So, and I also did not know when I first joined to do things with them. What was that? That was pre-pandemic when I first connected with them. I don't think I remember that a documentary was supposed to come out of it. I'm sure they might have said it or referenced it, but I just did not remember. And so when we got that email saying that, oh, we've got the documentary and we're going to do this premiere in October, and I was like, oh, okay. I didn't even remember half of what I said in that documentary, if I'm being honest.
But the documentary they interviewed like 167 people around the world, and they were discussing millennial Black spirituality. And, because, and it's from an American lens. So, the Black church was core in core principle in the conversation, and how people either got away from the Black church or are now enriching and doing the Black church in a different way. So it's not just a denouncement of Black church. It is just all different kind of variety of perspectives around spirituality, rooted in, some of us are rooted in African traditional religions. Some of us are still rooted in the church. Some of us have gone and got into more, Eastern ideas. It's so many variations. And so we were able to be a part of it. And so what are your takeaways from watching it and seeing the crowd? What are your takeaways?
Yeah, it's always interesting because you mentioned the bougie DC elite crowd that was in the audience. And I've been thinking about how, there was a reception afterwards, and, you and I were in our corner doing our thing. I
was telling my friend we were being each other's blanket.
Very that. Very that. But, people came up to us and was like, because I think it's safe to say that your story and my story, even though there are 7 principles, I feel like our stories, got like a little bit of sort of special treatment. So we're a little bit more central, I think, in the ways that we talk about and question and Black millennial faith in particular. And so we had all these bougie people coming up to us, thanking us for what we were saying and what we said in our example. And I kept thinking, are y'all taking this information and this, realization that you now have after this documentary, and are you going to take these reflections back to your church? Because I know all of them be in church on Sunday. I can tell because they had their Sunday's best on, for that event. And so that's something that I've been thinking about, like what they got legitimately from that documentary and how they hopefully are implementing some of the things that we brought up. And then for me personally, you know what? Because I did not remember much of what I said in that documentary, I didn't remember when I did most of those interviews. For me, my main takeaway is just like looking back at those other versions of myself, right? That in terms of like gender presentation, the animation,
that was so good.
Baby, they animated a part of my Black church journey that I forgot I had told in the documentary, and it really, when I spoke about before feeling secure in the importance and utility of my story, my journey, and putting it out in the world, watching that documentary kind of even further affirmed that, because it was like, wow, my story can be rendered on screen in this type of way, and it will hit people in a very different way than just the book or the podcast or the social media. And I did not conceptualize that or think of that when we were doing those interviews all those years ago. And so that's something that I'm really proud, right, to be able to say that, I am one of two trans people who are in the first documentary, right, that the Blacksonian has ever, you said this after the event, we are in not just an archive, we are in the archive, right? And that will mean something. I'm not sure what
it means something to me right now, but it will mean something to somebody.
Yes, it will mean something to somebody, and that makes whatever kind of, admittedly, I had a little bit of discomfort seeing some of them shots. I was like, ooh. Because, there used to be a time in my journey where I didn't mind, showing my beard, my 5 o'clock shadow. It was giving very, very gender non-conforming, non-binary, confusion.
Very alok.
Very alok, yes. It was giving very alok. And I'm not necessarily the hairy girl anymore. So that was that created just a little bit of I don't want to call it dysphoria or that type of comfort, but it was something that I saw on screen and I was like, ooh, just a little bit. Yeah, it was just like, because I'm not at that place with my gender presentation anymore. But the thing that eases everything and brings comfort about it all is exactly what you said. This will mean something to somebody later, right? It can mean something to somebody now, tomorrow, whatever, but it will mean something that we are there as we are, right? And we are who we are now. And so that made it wonderful.
For me, it was the power that our stories had, that we were sitting there watching them. Even when I was telling the story about the pastor and the whole theater gagged. And it moved them to say something or whisper, and the conversations was going. I was like, yeah, this is why this story is important. It is moving y'all. It is making y'all think and letting y'all know that there is nuance to this experience, and it can be a gag sometimes. So that part, definitely agree with that. But also in the regards to what you said earlier about where they are taking this, where are these folks taking this, even if they're not bougie, but in that reception, in that moment where we were together standing there and multiple people were coming up to us, we were learning what the answer to that, because people's response to us, you can see that for some people it was a deep in a shift and like,
Yes.
oh my God, this makes sense. But we also had the ladies, the bougie light-skinned ladies coming up to us talking about, oh, don't you think that it would be even better if we had some straight men? And we had to remind her, I know I did, had to remind her it actually was straight men in there and they were married. Did you not ignore that? Did you not see that? Did you not see blah, blah, blah? She was like, oh, was it? You were too busy judging us.
Yeah.
The trans woman and the non-binary person too busy judging us and not wanting us to even be in the space. You were so gagged that we were even on screen that you were ignoring the multitude of straight Black men that were in the documentary, literally ignoring it. And you were ignoring it so much that you had to come tell us, not the director, not the producers, come tell us that you wish it was Black men, aka you wish we were erased and not taking up space. And that's the silent part. And that's why I shaded that bitch while we were standing there.
It was so good, but she deserved it because you're absolutely right. Now, why are you bringing this to us? We didn't make the movie.
And then what she said? She said, oh, I didn't even know. And you was like, shade. I said, yes. She don't even know that. She don't even know that we're shading her. It's going over here. You remember when I was sitting there talking to you in her face? I was like, she doesn't even know the shade, and it's going over her head. This is how dumb this bitch is. And she's smiling.
Oh, so wild.
Yes,
so wild.
It was such a wild situation, and so that it was a perfect example of how, you know, when we talk about sensitive about our shit, everybody is not gonna be engaged with the material in an authentic way. They're coming to the material with biases, and they're coming to the material not being open. And there's some people that are, and they're gonna learn from it and take from it. But who I care about is the people that you are mentioning, the people who it is going to be important for, who is gonna push them in a direction and crack some kind of yoke, using the language of churchy language, crack somebody's yoke to push them in a direction of pride, push them in a direction of power, push them in a direction of self-actualization, even if it has to be through spirituality. They see a pathway that we represent. Somebody may need a cishet man journey, but somebody needs our journey too. And that's why it is powerful that we are part of it.
Absolutely.
Gimme euphoria, more than peace of mind. It's the joy and space to change the tide.
So to close out, what we always do on every show, we ask, what is bringing us euphoria? Because, a lot of transness is focused on the dysphoria of it all, And so I wanted to create a segment on our show that talks about euphoria. And so something super, super simple or something super, super deep, whatever you want it to be. What has brought you euphoria this week?
Oh, I love this question. And I'm going to say my creativity brings me the most euphoria. Like so much about the things that I'm doing now in life are like coming out of the depths of my imagination. And if you had a similar upbringing like I had, you weren't encouraged to use your imagination. And so you may not know. I'm discovering in real time, right, over these last few years with the books, with some other things that I'm working on, the power of my imagination, both in terms of, actualizing my gender and in terms of my career and in terms of my personal life. And so the thing that has brought me most euphoria, especially this week as I'm like, working on some things for the new year, has been, just like, wow, I am brilliant.
Amen.
You know what I mean? And not in a place of like cockiness, because I think, or arrogance. I think oftentimes, I'm a Leo as well. So I feel like also People just always want to be like, oh, the arrogant, cocky Leo. Maybe there's a little bit of that there. I don't know. But what I do know is that, like, I don't wait on other people to talk me up and big me up. Because when I was waiting on other people to do that, and when I put that power in other people, it didn't allow me to actualize my greatest potential. And so when I put that power of like affirmation and confirmation within myself, and I said that, yeah, girl, your creativity, you're going to have an idea and you're going to make it come to life, just like you did with both of these books, right? Praise the Lord, in 1 year, in the same way that I'm doing with these other things. That gives me the most euphoria. And then the last thing I'll say, just in a very, perhaps materialistic way, I just bought this new dress that, baby, listen, I put it on. Okay, got my Black Friday deal shopping. I put it on. I said, now who's that? I said, oh, girl. So that made me go like, oh, okay, girl, I see you.
I fucking live. I live for a fashion moment. What is bringing me euphoria this week? I want to kind of piggyback off of the humility thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just somebody who doesn't think that we should be humble.
Period.
I'm just somebody who thinks that I shouldn't have to explain to you when I say I'm a bad bitch. I shouldn't have to come after and say, well, I'm not trying to be arrogant. No, I'm just saying I'm a bad bitch because I'm a bad bitch. These are the facts. If I told you I was a Black woman, I wouldn't have to come back and explain shit. If I told you that my hat is black and white stripe, I don't have to explain it. My hat is black and white stripe.
These are facts.
These are facts. These are just what it is. This is what I feel about myself, and it's a fact in my reality. So this is what the fuck I am. And it doesn't make me better than you. I think the problem with arrogance is it's putting other people down, or I'm better than you. No, I'm telling you I'm a bad bitch to myself. I'm confident in what I do. I'm confident in what I bring to the table. I'm confident in who I am. And so I'm a bad bitch.
And you can be a bad bitch too.
Your way.
That's what I'm trying to say. Your way.
You can be the baddest bitch on your block. Not on my block, but on your block.
Big her. That part. Yes.
You feel what I'm saying? I'm the baddest bitch on my block, but on your block, in your lane, you are the baddest bitch. And so that brings me euphoria. But also, since you had a fashion moment, I have a fashion moment. I have, this is from a millenary. Their name is Essential, Black queer man, Essential, out of New York. And I have so many of their hats, and they bring me so much joy. I'm about to go off camera real quick. So I can put it on. It is a dope Russian cuff.
Period. Oh, this is cute.
You see what they give? Yes. It gives a little something. So it has been bringing me joy. I've been tipping around here in Houston. Tons of fashionista girls in Houston. So, and they have been living for it. And I got a couple of his pieces, but this is one of my favorite. It is a Russian cuff they have it in various colors.
It's so cute. It's so simple, but it like, it's like that type of accessory that like makes an outfit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yes, I love it. So Essential Hats has been bringing me euphoria for the past, especially since it's fall and I've been able to wear hats without being hot as hell, because I live in Houston. That has been bringing me euphoria. And so, you being on the show and me finally getting to interview you and share your brilliance, because you are, in fact, brilliant to me, to yourself, and that's all that matters in this moment.
Period.
And so you are, in fact, brilliant, and I love what you bring to the table. I love how you shake it up. I love how you just bring so much brightness and intellect and just amazingness to a space when you bring it. I love you. I love what you do. And I want to thank you for spending time with me today.
Thank you so much. I just want to give you a little bit of your flowers. I know the guests say it to you every single week when they on the show. I know, you a bad bitch. You a legend and icon and all that other stuff. But You are very much deserving of all of that attention and more. I want to thank you for having me. I want to thank you for the paths that you have paved for all of us, right? That you are continuing to pave. I was so excited to see you in that documentary because I said, "Oh yes, y'all better bring the legends to the screen. God damn it." Okay. So thank you for having me. So glad that we were finally able to make this happen.
Now tell the people where they can find you.
Yes, I am over on Twitter/X at Tre'vell Anderson, TREVELLANDRSON, and over on Instagram at Rayzhon, RAYZHON. And if you want to check out the books, you can go to Tre'vellAnderson.com to get all the information about those.
I will put all of those links down in the bottom. Make sure y'all go follow and make sure y'all go buy some books. Go support queer authors, support queer creatives. Yes. And thank you for supporting Marsha's Plate. And we will see y'all next week. The best way to support is to engage with the content. Like, comment, share, and subscribe. Another way to support, if you got a couple of dollars, become a patron. It's a monthly donation just to help content creators continue to do work that they do. So you're sacrificing a coffee or, just a small portion just to show your appreciation for the entertainment that we provide to you on a consistent basis. Thank you so much, and thank you for listening. Have a wonderful day.